Mic check, 1 2 1 2.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
This is Bob Bender. You're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music. In the studio this week, a gentleman I met at the CD Baby DIY conference in Nashville about a month or so ago, came up to our Business Side of Music podcast table, and we started to talk, found out he was an attorney that actually specializes in copyright law, which for a lot of our listeners is really kind of a dark, unknown territory. And so I think this is going to be vitally important for them. Jim Jesse has been an attorney since 1992. He's been a full-time music law presenter since 2013. He's the former general counsel for Cool Music Network, Cool TV, which is a 24-hour-a-day music video television network. Previously, he was in private practice. He's founded Rock and Roll Law, and his passion is spreading music law through his seminars. Thousands of attorneys have taken his courses around the country. He's also, of course, a singer and songwriter who's released 3 albums, and he's the author of the Music Copyright Law Manual and the forthcoming The Musician's Guide to Music Copyright Law. You can also hear him on SoundCloud with his own podcast called Rock and Roll Law Podcast. Jim, welcome to the show.
Bob, thank you for that introduction. It's great to be here.
This is probably conversations that I think musicians, especially songwriters, should never have with their fellow brothers or sisters, right, but instead should have with someone such as yourself, which is an attorney that specializes in copyright law. Now, I will tell you, my background over the years, I've had several different types of attorneys. This is probably one attorney I've never had in my library, which I should, because this is vitally, vitally important business when you're writing a song, right?
Oh, totally agree, Bob. I think you said in the introduction, it's sort of a dark area or dark spot for musicians, and hopefully I can try to shed a little light on it. I think it's fundamental because, I'm also a songwriter and I deal with these issues, and you've got to understand, I think in order to understand music law, you've got to understand copyrights, because I think a lot of it flows from that. What you have, what copyrights do I have here? What are my rights? Where does the money come from? I think understanding that is vital, frankly.
And ultimately, the copyright law was created to protect the owner of content. And it's something that, and it doesn't cost really much of anything to get it done through the Copyright Office, right?
No, it does not. It is, last time I checked, if you do it electronically, which is much easier, it's $55 per application. I think paper is $85. And, if you meet a couple of criteria, you can copyright an entire album as a collective work where, people like myself, where I'm the sole songwriter and I own the masters, I can copyright an entire album for $55. Obviously, that's cheaper than copyrighting each song for $55.
Does it make more sense to copyright an individual song, or if you have all of the songs, and you are, once again, because we're going to talk about this in a little bit with regards to joint authorship, but if you're the sole owner of that music, does it make sense to does it make sense to copyright each individual song, or are you better off doing it as a full embodiment of work, say a 10-song or 12-song album?
It makes no difference legally. I think each song has as much protection as if you copyrighted them separately. So I don't, frankly, just given the expense of it, go ahead and just copyright them all as a collective work. And again, there's, you have to meet a couple criteria, but basically, if you're the sole owner of both, like a solo artist or a band, and the band co-writes all the songs together and all that and owns everything together, then yeah, you can copyright a whole album as a collective work. So I recommend doing that. There's no benefit. Now, look, if you're releasing a single or an EP and you just have a few songs, then yes, just go ahead and copyright those separate, however many songs or single you have.
What are the basics, and we talked about this when we were on the phone a couple of weeks ago leading up to this, what are the basics that musicians need to know? And I guess the very first question is, what is a copyright and how does it protect them?
Okay, great question. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, you don't have a copyright until you put a song in what is called a tangible medium of expression. And that could be anything. Song pops in your head, you sing it into your phone. Most music now is created on computers. So you have it on Pro Tools or GarageBand or whatever. You have a copyright then. And again, we discussed previously registering it with the Copyright Office. The fundamental thing, I think, and the thing that I think most musicians miss is once you record a song, you have two copyrights in the song. One is what I call the composition, the music, the lyrics, if the song has lyrics. And then secondly, and I think this is not a copyright that is as familiar to most musicians, what is called the sound recording, more commonly referred to as the master or master recordings.
I'm taking it those are actually two different bodies?
Two distinct copyrights. I guess the easiest way is, I think most people know what the composition is, usually referred to as the song. The melody, the lyrics, etc. But the sound recording, I think, is a little more nebulous. And the easiest way I can describe that is how the composition sounds. So one composition can have many different sound recordings, like a demo version, and you refine it, alternate takes till you finally get the version you want, and you put it on your album. And then maybe there's a live version you record later, or maybe other people cover it. Those are all different sound recordings, but the composition hasn't changed. So I think that's probably the easiest way for people to understand that. And if you understand that there are two copyrights on every song, and both of those have their own revenue sources. So if you're not familiar with the sound recording, you literally may be missing out on potentially half of a song's revenue.
And you mentioned tangible medium of expression. Go into that a little more if you don't mind.
It is somewhat of a misnomer because, people think of tangible, they think of things you can touch, and certainly it does mean that. People used to mail, and I think you refer to this, you mail a CD or a cassette
we called it a poor man's copyright, yeah.
Right, and you could certainly still do that, and you have the postmark, but now most music's created digitally, on people's computer, Logic, Pro Tools, GarageBand, what have you. And then you can certainly make it, so I think that the courts have determined that is a tangible medium of expression, even though the song is technically not tangible. It's sort of digitally lying on your computer because, so that is also considered a tangible medium of expression. So it doesn't have to be physical, although it certainly can be. Like I said today, you can certainly still mail something to yourself, but like I said, most music now is on a computer, and you can prove I wrote this is my computer, and here it is.
So here's a question I have that may be a little quirky. I'm not sure. You record the song maybe as you're building it, as you're constructing it, creating it, and you record it 4 or 5 times. It's on your laptop. You really don't need to copyright all of those. You just need to copyright the final product.
That's exactly right. It's a great question. No, I would copyright the final version, either the composition and or master recording or sound recording. Most indie artists that probably listen to your podcast will be the author and or owner of both. But no. Now, you could, Bob, for the deluxe set, the reissued, you could do alternate takes, and then you could copyright those. Why do you think, when you sign with a record label, the label usually owns the sound or master recordings? Why do you think, there's an alternate version of Sgt. Pepper's, or the box set of, Bob Dylan bootleg series, whatever they're up to now, 13 or 14. There's alternate versions. There's live versions. Those are always, keep those in the can. Musicians, you can make money off of your alternate versions someday, perhaps.
Make sure you've got at least a copyright on the master.
Yes.
Very good.
of the final version.
Yeah.
Correct.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to dig a little more into copyright law, and we touched briefly on the poor man's copyright, and I also want to talk about joint authorships, and we discussed exclusive rights, and so we got a lot to dig into here. In the studio with us today here in Nashville, Tennessee, Jim Jesse, who's an attorney, specializes in copyright law, is also the host of Rock and Roll Law podcast that you can hear on SoundCloud, and the author of the Music Copyright Law Manual and his upcoming The Musician's Guide to Music Copyright Law. This is Bob Bender, and you're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
Hey guys, this is Gooding. You're listening to The Business Side of Music with Bob Bender. Check in every week for new content. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Hi, this is Vinny Ribas, the founder of Indie Connect. Our goal is to ensure that you have the knowledge, the tools, skills, resources, and connections that you need to develop a profitable and long-lasting career in music. One way we do this is through these Business Side of Music podcasts. I'd also like to invite you to check out Indie Connect magazine, our free multimedia online publication packed with practical interviews and advice from music industry experts. Go to www.indieconnectmag.com. That's www.indieconnectmag.com. Let us walk with you and guide you every step of your musical journey.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
This is Bob Bender. You're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music. In the studio with us today, Jim Jesse. He's an attorney who specializes in copyright law. We were going over some of the aspects, the initial, setting up that copyright. And you said there's two ways you can do it. You can go on, put it in the mail, fill out the paperwork, or you can do it online. If I'm old school and I want to do it through the mail, where do I get that information? Where do I get that paperwork to fill out?
Copyright.gov, and in particular, I recommend they have like circulars that talk about different topics, but Circular 1 has just basic copyright information that will go over a lot of stuff we discussed today, so that's a good source of info. But the copyright.gov has all the forms you need. So again, 2 copyrights in every song, as we just discussed. If you are copyrighting the composition, the music, and the lyrics, you would submit Form PA, which stands for Performing Arts. If you're copyrighting the sound recordings, they call that Form SR. That's pretty tricky for sound recording. Now, if you are like me and you own both the composition and the sound recording, you would also fill out Form SR, and that will get you the copyright to the sound recording, as well as the potentially the underlying composition. So those are the forms you need. Again, you can create an account online, or if you're old school, print them out, send them in. You'll have to send a physical copy of if you're doing it, with the paper form, you obviously have to send a physical copy of your music.
Yeah. So let's say I do it online, or I drop it in the mail, how long does it take typically? I mean, I've heard everything from 6 months to 2 years. How long does it typically take to get something back from them? And what is it? Is it a certificate? Is it a piece of paper? How does that work?
Good question. It varies. I do know that the paper application takes longer. I think the digital one it's been a little while since I've done it, is 6 to 8 weeks approximately. And yes, you will get a certificate of copyright suitable for framing, along with your gold records up on your wall.
Absolutely.
And and it'll tell you what you've copywritten. And an interesting thing on that is, so if you copyright just the composition, it'll say what you created, and it'll say music and lyrics. If you've copyrighted the sound recording, it will say, I've copyrighted, the sound recording as a whole, the performance and production. So those are also aspects. Everybody who plays on a song can potentially claim ownership of a sound recording. And certainly if you have a producer, production is a specific component of the sound recording. Obviously, producers can add a lot to sound recordings as well.
And that's something we talked about a few weeks ago with regards to work for hire. And I shared the story with you where an artist went into the studio with the producer. They recorded a catalog of songs and released the project. The artist had not followed up, nor had the producer, with work for hire documents. And then all of a sudden, one of the musicians is coming back, and one of the session players is coming back and saying, "Hey, I want my piece of the pie." So that's something you need to work on. Kind of like, don't worry about the horse, load the cart.
Exactly, and get that done prior to recording. Now, do most musicians do this? No. I mean, maybe where you're at in Nashville, it's probably more common, particularly, in the major label world. But yes, if I'm an artist, I mean, and I've got language in my book about this, just have them sign a short contract that says, look, I'm paying you, or I'm giving you whatever, and you don't own any of this composition or master recording. And frankly, most session musicians or producers really don't want to own part of your master. They just want to get paid, because who knows if the recording's going to go anywhere. Just pay them for their work, and it's a pretty standard thing. But then it protects you from people like the example you just gave, where people come out of the woodwork, and say, oh, and they could legitimately claim that if they played on the composition. I don't care if you're the, the bongo player, however limited you're playing, if you're on the master recording, you can claim ownership of it.
If you're playing cowbell?
If you were playing cowbell on Don't Fear the Reaper, I got a fever, Bob. And, and the only prescription is more cowbell. Yes, and in fact, I actually give the cowbell example in my classes. So exactly, it's there. It's there in the song.
Yeah, and as much as we joke about it, that cowbell actually did make an impact in that tune.
Yes.
And so where can they find these work for? Because you talked about contracts. So let me back up a little bit. And I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate here. I'm going to go in the studio. I'm going to record. I've got, I don't know, 5, 6, 10, 12 session players and a producer maybe I've never worked with before. Business is business. Friendship is friendship. But you still need that paperwork. You need that contract. Is it two different things? Do you need a separate contract, or does a work for hire pretty much encompass all of that protection?
I think a work for hire does, and let's step back and explain what a work for hire is. Work for hire is the person being hired is contributing to a creative work, but they're not going to be the owner of it. Like, let's say you work for Disney and you draw Buzz Lightyear. Well, Disney's going to own that. You're not going to own that. You hire someone to, like, you're a band and you hire someone to shoot a video for you. Well, the band's going to want to own it, not the videographer. So you need to have something in writing that says, look, I'm hiring you, I'm paying you to do this, I own this, and any interest you have, you're transferring to me, because obviously they're part of it. So getting back to the music part of it, the work for hire basically is, I'm a band or artist, I'm hiring you to play, and I do this all, because I only play guitar, I need a drummer and keyboard player, etc., and production. Yeah. Now, do most musicians do this? No. Does it ever cause a problem? Usually not, because most songs, there's millions of songs out there, and they don't generate substantial income. But it doesn't, just to be safe, I recommend people have those agreements in place.
What about joint authorship? We've touched on that briefly.
Yeah, so that's that can be a tricky issue. So you're talking about authorship. Let's 2 copyrights in every song. I mean, the sound recording. The easiest thing on that, or the masters, is just if you're in a group, you just all own it. Usually, by and large, playing on every song together to a greater or lesser extent. So I think, if you're in a band, the band members, or the band company, however you want to structure it, owns the master recordings. So solo artists, again, like myself, you would own that. Now, compositions, that's a little trickier, because, I write songs like, what do you have to contribute to be considered a joint author? Maybe just for band piece, you just say, you know what? I mean, I think the Doors did this. And I think U2 does this. Maybe Van Halen. Just say, all songs are written by the Doors. And then you equally split the publishing money. That's usually not the reality. Usually maybe 1 or 2 people in the band write the songs. It's every song's different. So I would, it just depends on the song, who comes up with the melody and or lyrics. Is what they contribute, substantial enough, original, etc.
You brought up something, though, when you say that the Doors is a band, or Van Halen. Let's take Van Halen for a second here because they went through some personnel changes. They
Yes.
lost David Lee Roth and they brought in his replacement. I can't drive. Yeah, Sammy Hagar. I can't drive 55. Can you continue to do that? I mean, how do you separate at that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, the songs from the David Lee era, Roth would get part of that publishing revenue, and then the songs from the Sammy would get part of that. And then, in fact, they booted Michael Anthony. I think Eddie's son, Wolfgang, plays bass now. So again, there would be different songwriters for different eras of the band splitting whatever songs were done in that particular era. And then their publisher would have to figure out all those splits. And again, CD Baby, I use them as my third-party publisher. They have a split sheet that you can fill out with your joint author.
Yeah.
They'll ask you, who's the author or authors of these songs? List them all. And again, there's no single answer on that. Again, if you're a band and you want to split all the publishing revenue, go for it. I mean, maybe that's the reality. Maybe everything evens out in the end. Again, that could be a contentious issue because I will say this, if there are songs, let's say there's one or two people in the band that write the songs and the songs take off and they don't share the publishing revenue, well, that one or two people in the band are going to get the publishing revenue and the others won't, and that can create resentment in the band, and that has happened in many bands. The Go-Go's, I'm thinking if you've seen the Go-Go's Behind the Music, they had a huge blow up regarding that.
And it's a revenue stream that, really if you have a part, and I jump back again to the cowbell and Don't Fear the Reaper, if you have a part and that song is that huge, you really want that income stream from that.
Absolutely. And you could claim, Cowbell guy would be hard pressed to claim authorship of the composition, but certainly the master recording.
Yeah, and there's money to be made there.
Absolutely, there is money to be made there.
We're going to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about that. Where do the revenue streams come from? Because I think that's something that's important. In this day and time and music industry economy, we don't want to. It gets complicated. The streaming portion of the business gets complicated. So we're going to touch on that when we come back. In the studio with us today, Jim Jesse, the attorney who is also singer-songwriter and author of Music Copyright Law Manual and the upcoming Musician's Guide to Music Copyright Law. We're going to talk about that a little bit when we come back. He's also the host of the Rock and Roll Law podcast on SoundCloud. And you're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
Hi, this is Michael Ma, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music, ranked as the #2 music business industry podcast by Think Tank Magazine.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Wow, I just joined the Music Starts Here community. This is a truly hidden gem for anyone in the music business. Whether you live in Nashville or anywhere else in the world, Music Starts Here is like a GPS for your music career. This is the place to be if you want to get advice and direction from some seriously talented musical people who have been where you want to go. Music news, events, and a great big community with resources for artists, songwriters, musicians, studio and tech, along with music business advice from pros in the industry, all on one site. Make sure you get your free profile now. Go to www.musicstartshere.org. That's musicstartshere.org.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
This is Bob Bender. You're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music. In the studio with us today, Jim Jesse, who's an entertainment lawyer specializing, I should say, in copyright law. Got a chance to meet him at the CD Baby DIY conference in Nashville a month or so ago, which I got to say is probably one of the coolest events to go to, especially if you're an independent artist. So definitely next year, put that on your calendar. You'll meet really neat people who have a wealth of information like Jim. We talked a bit about, work for hire. We've talked about joint authorship. One of the things that, we haven't touched on because it has become somewhat of a complicated business, and that's streaming. That now makes not only the majority of the revenue streams, although it's less than it used to be, but it also makes the business that much more complicated.
Yeah, it does, because the law, streaming came along and the law really hasn't caught up to it. But by and large, with revenue, I mean, I guess you can boil it down like this. There's and that's why it's so important to understand that there are 2 copyrights in every song, because they each have their own revenue streams. So on the composition side, you have music publishing, and I've referred to publishing. So when you hear that term publishing, that is the revenue that the composition generates. By and large, collected by BMI and ASCAP. Hopefully you have a third-party publisher to collect all that, because it's complicated, like CD Baby or TuneCore or whatever company you use. And then there's also money generated on the master side, and by and large, those are collected by an entity called Sound Exchange, who was also at this CD Baby conference, had a session with them. And they collect royalties from the master side on some of the streaming on sites like Pandora. So again, I think the easiest way is to have a third-party publisher collect at least most of the publishing revenue, and then have register your songs with Sound Exchange to get part of the master side.
And that's something right there that a lot of, I think, songwriters, artists don't recognize is Sound Exchange is another one of those pieces of the puzzle that you need to incorporate into your business plan.
Absolutely. And most musicians aren't aware of that. And I know there was just talking to musicians at the conference and just talking to them in general. They're just not aware of that side. They kind of know about BMI and ASCAP and the composition, and maybe they've registered their songs, or maybe they're a songwriter and they've affiliated with one or the other. But on Sound Exchange, look, and it's not too late. Sound Exchange can go back a couple years and see if there's royalties for you. So even if you've had an album out for a year or two, register it with Sound Exchange, and go to soundexchange.com for more information. Get your masters registered. Again, Sound Exchange is for the masters or sound recording.
You brought up something there is in Sound Exchange, the PROs such as BMI or ASCAP or CSEC, they do not take the place of a copyright, and they're not part of Sound Exchange either, correct?
That is correct. And again, I think there's misunderstanding about what BMI and ASCAP do. And yes, they are separate from that. I guess the easiest way to answer it is Sound Exchange is to the master sound recording what BMI and ASCAP is to the composition. Okay, so again, 2 copyrights in every song, and they each have different entities that collect those royalties. And again, I think that's where things get confusing, because I know there were musicians in the Sound Exchange session at this conference we were at. There were songwriters, and songwriters may own the master, but not necessarily. And so Sound Exchange was just talking about master rights owners, and it's a different ballgame.
It is, and I've had that conversation when my wife and I went to a television conference a few years back, and we were talking about the exact same thing with regards to who is paying and what do you do if they're not paying. I remember they had an attorney there from the Justice Department who was talking about how they had gone after YouTube to make sure that they paid their correct royalties, although it's not a lot of money. They were going after other ones, like Twitter and Facebook. But it's, as you as the songwriter, as you as the sole owner or author of this music, it still behooves you to make sure that you have all your bases covered, because if something like that does happen, you don't want them to go back. You said it was Sound Exchange. They're only going to go back a couple of years. Anything before that, it is your responsibility, so you need to make sure you've got your job done.
That's exactly right. It is a music business, as your podcast aptly points out. And look, we're creators. We love playing music. We love creating music. You've got to get the fundamentals in place first. I think that's so important, so that once money does start coming in, you know where it's coming from, you know how it's generated, and you know where it's going.
I want to talk a little bit about your books too, because you wrote the book, The Music Copyright Law Manual, and then you have the new one coming up, The Musician's Guide to Music Copyright Law. Talk a little bit about the book that you've currently got out.
Well, the book I currently have out, The Music Copyright Manual, was written, I do seminars mainly for lawyers to get, most states require continuing legal education, and it's an entertaining course. A lot of lawyers don't practice in this. So I play music in it. And so it's sort of a book that goes into much more detail than I can in class. But over the years, and this conference solidified it, musicians are the real ones who need this knowledge. So I've sort of taken that basic book, stripped a lot of the legalese off and a lot of the more esoteric issues out, and sort of just boiled it down to, this is what you need to know about music copyright law as a musician. And again, I'm a songwriter myself. I mean, I'm a creator. I've done everything. I've learned about this as a songwriter, so I'm not just coming at it from a academic standpoint. So my forthcoming book, The Musician's Guide to Music Copyright Law, sort of focuses on it from a musician's standpoint, how to protect your creative works, where the money comes from, and things like that.
So how can they find these books? Now, the Music Copyright Law Manual is currently out. When do you expect the Musician's Guide to Music Copyright Law to be coming out?
Probably right around or soon after this podcast airs.
Okay.
I'm finishing it up right now, and it should be out soon, and people can pre-order it on my website, rock, N as in Nancy, rolllaw.com.
And that's a good way for people to find you too, correct?
Absolutely. Contact info. And look, I'm always happy to answer artists' questions. My contact info is on there. Shoot me an email, and I'm happy to help any way I can.
Very good. Jim, thanks for being on the show. This has been a wealth of information. Love to get you back sometime.
Bob, absolute pleasure. Great being here. Thank you for having me.
As a listener, you know that the Business Side of Music podcast is free. But in order to keep it running, consider becoming a patron of our show. You can do this by going to our Patreon page on our website, which is www.businesssideofmusic.com, and click on Support the Podcast button. When you become a patron of our podcast, you'll have access to material that you won't be hearing on our regular shows, insight from industry leaders that is designed for our patron members, and have the ability to purchase the Business Side of Music merchandise that you can find on our website at a discount.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Traci Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. Co-producer for the show is Vinny Ribas. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Los Angeles, California and Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound designed by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Busan.